Hey everyone, what's the crack? My name is Lawrence. I've been sim racing for 25 years. I've been doing ACC almost exclusively for the past 6 months. Here's what I've learned. So here are the top 5 things that I've learned in the past 6 months that are somewhat specific to ACC. We all know various things that will make you a better driver, like, you know, braking or practice or whatever, but these things are all very specific to ACC. So at number 5 on the list, and this one is one that you find out very, very early, tire pressures. Tire pressures in ACC play a fundamental role. If you are even half a PSI out, so 0.5 PSI away from where your tire pressures should be, you could lose up to 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds a lap, and you could cook your tires and you can completely ruin your race. Getting tire pressures correct in Assetto Corsa Competizione is absolutely vital. You need to get good at it too. It's just something you can't avoid. Unlike a lot of other sims, you don't really have the concept of a fixed setup race. So you always have this open setup concept, which really means that you have to learn a lot about setup. We'll cover that in a later point. Spoiler alert. Because the Assetto Corsa Competizione is so sensitive to tire pressures, you really need to be on top of your game and you need to know exactly what you're doing when you're adjusting those pressures. Usually there's a bit of a rule of thumb that if the temperature changes by 1 degree, you change by 0.1 degree of tire pressure. Now that doesn't always hold true because once your tires are at pressure, it's easier for them to create the heat, which in turn creates more pressure. So it's a bit of a dark art. Sometimes you get it bang on, but more often than not, just don't get it 100% right, especially when you show up to a track and you haven't got a setup with those exact tire pressures saved yet, and you try to kind of guess it and you end up being 0.2 or 0.3 away from where you want to be for the whole race, and it has a significant impact, which is sometimes why I complain about ACC and I call it tire pressure simulator, because that's just not really, I don't really like doing that part of it, but it's something that's vital for ACC. You have to be good at it. There is no other way around it. On a related but slightly separate note, I'd love to see a feature in ACC whereby you could save specifically the tire pressures only and not necessarily the rest of the setup. Because what I find happens is I save a specific tire pressure on a specific setup for a track, and then I change something in the aero. I'm like, oh, this feels good, or I change the A or B or whatever, and then I have all these other setups saved, all with their little temperature names on them, because I saved them like LD, then the track temperature, then the air temperature, but each one of those then has the wrong A or B setting. So I'd love to be able to save that tire pressure as a separate thing. That'd be kind of nice. Anyway, that's not what this video is about. Tire pressures do vary as well if you're going between GT3 and GT4 classes. For GT3, off the top of my head, anywhere between 27.3 and I think 27.9 or 28, that's where you want to be. For GT4, it's anywhere between 26.8 and 27.4. It's really kind of a narrow range. Once you're in there, you need to stay there and you need to conserve your tires just to make sure that you do stay within those limits, because, as I say, it's absolutely vital. I wish it wasn't so important, but it's vital. Second on my list is to use whatever you have at your disposal to feel the road. So things like lights or vibration motors, tactile feedback. Because, and I make no secret about this on my streams, ACC lacks a certain amount of road feel. Now, if you have never used any other simulators or whatever, you probably have a far better, or you're far more tuned in with what your car is doing within ACC. And you might say to yourself, I have no problem with the force feedback in ACC. But if you come from other simulators, Assetto Corsa or iRacing even, you will miss certain things in your force feedback which you just don't get in ACC. I need those things, I rely on them heavily, so I use tactile transducers like a butt kicker, I use lights, I use whatever I can. One of the biggest things that I do is I actually turn up the tire volume so that it's not drowned out by the engine, so that I can hear when the tires start losing traction before I need to even feel it, or before I realize the hard way that I was sliding. Because the crux of the matter is, in ACC, traction is absolutely everything. If you're not fully connected to the road at all times, as in if you're losing traction, if you're sliding, if you're drifting out wide or whatever, 99% of the time, you're losing a lot of time. Unless you really know what you're doing and really know that what you're doing is gaining you time by sliding the car, depending on the configuration of the car, the corners that you're going through or whatever. In general, if you just brake as hard as you can and hit the throttle as hard as you can, you're going to be sliding around the place. Your steering inputs need to be very delicate and all that. So yeah, knowing when you're sliding is absolutely essential. Number 3 on the list, and it's kind of related to what I was just saying, is your throttle and your traction control. Firstly, you need to be super careful with that throttle coming out of corners. Some cars don't even tell you that you're losing traction or whatever, and in some cars you don't know that the traction control is kicking in. It's not like in a lot of other sims where it completely bogs you down. It kind of like throttles you to an extent, pardon the pun. It kind of just means that you can't get all of your power down, which is exactly what traction control is supposed to do. But if you're used to other simulators, you may not realize how they've actually implemented it in ACC. So when you're exiting corners, just be very mindful that that throttle can't just be hammered to 100%. You need to really ease on it, and often you can gain a lot of time just by going on half throttle or quarter throttle just to keep that car balanced. So trail braking is a huge thing. I'm not going to mention it here. ACC is very sensitive to the balance of the car, but overall, traction is key. Learn to get that traction. You will find, well, I found a second, maybe even 2 seconds a lap just from knowing where the traction is. One thing that really helps with the traction is to adjust your traction control. One of the things that I do when I'm practicing is lower that traction control to the point where you really feel when you're coming out of corners that you're breaking traction, and then go up a little bit. You need that traction control. The traction control is there for a reason, right? People who have, bravado about their driving will tell you, no traction control is best, less traction control, whatever. That's all fine if you can control the car perfectly. But the reality is these cars have traction control for a reason. Real life drivers use them. You should too, but you should understand how that traction control works and when it works for you. So when you download a setup or get a setup from someone, that traction control is set up for them and their driving style. It may not suit you. It may still be too slidey, or it may not be slidey enough. So adjust that traction control as well as your tire pressures. The 4th item on my list is track guides. Now, there are umpteen track guides out there, right? There are lots and lots of them. And the nice thing about ACC is that it's relatively scoped. You have a limited number of cars, all pretty much in the same classes, and you have a limited scope of tracks. So you're going to find very good track guides that have lots and lots of views and all that kind of stuff. Now the issue is, one of the things that I highly recommend looking at track guides. One thing that doesn't work for me is looking at track guides, which are basically just a recording of someone's lap. It does nothing for me. It doesn't make me any quicker. It looks exactly like my slow ass lap that's like 5 seconds slower, and I don't understand why they're so much faster. Get yourself onto some track guides. I'm not going to name them here, but you guys, if you have specific track guides that you go to, actually I'm going to name one. The Traction GG track guides are pretty good because they analyze corners from different camera angles, tell you the different things, and they don't necessarily concentrate on being, a super alien either. They'll get you a quick lap, and they'll make you think about the track in ways that you don't think about if you're just practicing away to yourself. So watch track guides, watch the ones that really go into detail about the track, and don't just show off somebody's driving and how fast they are. Because in all honesty, that only makes me feel worse if I see a track guide and that person is doing what I think is exactly what I'm doing, except they're like 5 seconds faster. Wrecks my head. I've no time for it. I'd rather see a slow lap that gives me some information than a fast lap that gives me nothing. And finally, last but not least, this is a huge one, setup. To be good at ACC, you need to be a setup master. Now, the standard aggressive setup and stuff is pretty decent, and I don't care what people say, setup makes a massive, massive, massive difference in ACC. If you don't know how to set up a car, you can either learn or you can buy setups. I would still recommend trying to learn, even though I'm pretty bad at the learning. I haven't learned much about setups in ACC. I know quite a lot about setups in other simulators. I know the basic principles and stuff like that, but it is a dark art in ACC. There seem to be a lot of loopholes and stuff like that. I just buy setups. I recommend buying setups from the likes of Coach Dave Academy. Sometimes they suit me, sometimes they don't. Sometimes there are others like Hymo setups that really suit me. So it really depends on the car and track. Now I realize that not everybody can just go and buy one and then buy the other and all that kind of stuff. There are plenty of free setups out there. If you do look at those hot laps that I mentioned before, people often share their setups that they used for that actual hot lap. Try lots of setups and you'll learn lots about what the car is doing. You don't necessarily even need to know what's happening in those setups, but it is good to know what people have adjusted to make the car better for you. In most other simulators, setups do make a difference, but it's usually like a half a second, maybe a second. In ACC, I found that setups can make 2.5, 3 seconds of a difference on a lap for me. That may just be me. Please tell me in the comments if you agree or disagree with that, but I think setups are absolutely massive. If you don't have a decent setup, it doesn't matter if you're the best driver in the world. In most, like as I say, in most simulators, it seems like if you're a good driver, you'll do well on pretty much any setup. In ACC, you won't. You need a decent setup, and most of the good drivers know a lot about their setup. It's one of the things I love about ACC, but it also makes that learning curve a lot higher. Get with a community, get people to share their setups with you, and learn that way. And I think that's probably the best bit of advice that I can give you. Sometimes, even though it looks like you're doing exactly what the people on the fast hot laps are doing, the setup makes a lot of difference, and it may make you that little bit more comfortable, that little bit more confident with the car as well. So yeah, setups. That's my 5 points. I'm going to give you one extra bonus point, and especially for beginners, do not, whatever you do, don't practice with AI. A lot of people will tell you to practice with AI, but just don't, because in real life, real people don't do the things that AI do. No matter how good the AI is, they are programmed to give you a good experience within that application. So that means basically if you come up between two AI cars, they will give you enough space. They will follow the sporting codes. There's very little chance that they'll just punch you off, or there's very little chance that they don't know that you're there. In real racing, so in online racing, people are going to do things that are unpredictable, and most of the time you shouldn't be putting your car in that position in the first place. What happens when people do too much AI racing is they start doing dive bombs, and they start doing the same type of overtakes that they do against the AI. They don't care about the AI, they only care about winning, and that really wrecks people's races, and it ruins your own experience too, because you're fine racing offline, and all of a sudden when you're racing online against real people, you just kind of suck because you haven't been taught the right things. And finally, I'll leave you with this one. If you're, and I'm learning this the hard way, right? If you race in ACC and you're not making improvement, you need to make some sort of adjustment. Whether it's a setup adjustment, whether you need training, whether you need advice from people or whatever. One of the things with ACC is that you really, it's a very repetitive thing that you learn, right? So you do lots and lots of laps and you learn all these, ways to go quicker. One problem with that is you're also reinforcing your bad habits, which is a thing that I'm very, very guilty of. So I'm doing all these bad habits, and then when somebody tells me, oh, you shouldn't be coasting through that corner, I'm like, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't be coasting through that corner. But like, I've done it hundreds of times in that corner because I've been practicing, trying to get faster. It's just difficult to unlearn. Unless you're super conscious of it and someone's telling you, you won't notice that it's actually quicker to be on throttle or trail brake through that corner or whatever it is. You won't notice because your habits have been so reinforced. You don't feel as much, I mean, this is just my opinion, you don't feel as much in ACC as you do in a real car or in many other simulators. So what that means is that you have to memorize what's the fastest thing, as in doing a corner like this made my delta faster. You don't necessarily feel that sense of that was a quick corner as you go through those corners. Again, may just be me. Feel free to fundamentally disagree with me in the comments below. Do leave a comment though if you like this kind of video. Hopefully this was useful for some people. It's like 6 months of knowledge crammed into one little, okay, like maybe not 6 months of knowledge because I've learned more than just this little video. Anyway, that's it for me. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Lawrence. I'll chat to you later.